In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Those of you know me will be surprised, not that I'm starting with a couple of stories, but who are the central figures in the stories? They're stories about a cat, or cats. And being a dog lover, cats are not usually who I'm going to talk about. But I want to share these stories with you because I think in an odd way they help me unpack today's gospel. We'll get there eventually. The first is a family story, not my family story, but someone's family story. And Judith was a very faithful person. Every morning she got up before the rest of her family so she could have her quiet time to say her prayers and spend time with God. She was a faithful Episcopalian who would begin with morning prayer from the well-worn pages of her prayer book, and then spend time in silence asking God to fill her and to open her to hear his voice and to see his actions in everyone she would encounter that day. This time was her special gift to herself, and everyone in the family knew that if they were up early for some reason, they should leave her alone. That is, everyone except the cat. Every morning the cat would wake up when Judith got out of bed, stretch, and then come and try to get into her lap. She tried gently putting him aside, even feeding him or letting him go outside, but he wouldn't leave her alone. It got to the point that all she had to do was pick up her prayer book and he would jump into her lap and try to get between her and the book. Finally, in desperation, she took the drastic step of getting a leash and actually tying the cat to the bedpost while she said her prayers and got ready to start the day. The cat didn't like it, but eventually he got used to it. Several years later, her daughter was married and starting a family and trying to keep her spiritual life alive, and she remembered her mother's discipline and decided to try it herself. She got up early and took her prayer book and sat down to pray. Now, with a small child, she didn't have as much time as her mother had taken, so she read morning prayer quickly, spent a couple minutes in silence before getting on with her day. And when, like her mother, she had to deal with the family cat wanting attention, she simply followed the family tradition and tied the cat to the bedpost until she'd said her prayers and was dressed and ready for the day. And this worked well to feed her spiritual life. Years later, her son was married with a family, and he too wanted to find a spiritual discipline that would help him to remain faithful. So he began to get up early and spend a few minutes reading morning prayer, or sometimes, if he was really busy, just spending quiet time with God before getting ready to work. 10 minutes was usually all he had, but he figured it was better than nothing. Without really thinking about it, he took the precaution of tying the family cat to the bedpost as soon as he got up, so he wouldn't be bothered until after his prayers and after his time getting dressed and ready for the day. Finally, his daughter left home, took a job, got married, and began living a busy and challenging life. She went to church more out of a sense of obligation and because that was what good folk did than any other reason. But somehow the deep family tradition of quiet time with God early in the morning didn't take root in her soul. But she did remember the family traditions. And so each morning she got up, as soon as she got up, she tied the family cat to the bedpost until she was dressed and ready for her busy day. A second cat story. We'll leave that one and talk about it a little bit later. This one was told by our presiding bishop, Michael Curry, when he spent a little portion of the clergy retreat day in the Diocese of Ohio with us virtually. And it's a true story about his family. He says they have several cats, but one in particular absolutely hates going to the vet. And this cat is smart enough that he realized that whenever he saw the cat carrier come out, that it probably meant a visit to the vet, and so he would go into full flight or into full fight to avoid it. And finally, Bishop Curry says they finally caught the cat, corralled him, got him into the cage, and he was yowling, unhappy at being in it, and took him to the vet. They got to the vets, and as soon as the vet opened the cage, they had to pull the cat out. The vet did his work, gave him his shots, checked him over, and then as soon as they let go of him, the cat immediately jumped back into the cage. And Bishop Curry asked the vet, what's the deal? He hates coming here. He'll fight to get in the cage. And the vet said, yes, but now that cage has become his safe spot. And so he wants to get back into it as soon as possible. Keep those two stories in mind, and we'll get back to them a little bit. I remember them when I read this Gospels lesson and when I read an excellent sermon by the Reverend Joseph Pagano. I want you to know that he did not tell these stories, but much of the thought for this sermon comes from him. But my first thought when I read the gospel was that it was about time we heard some comfortable or comforting words from Jesus. The gospel passages for the last few weeks have been very challenging. And the reality is I am tired, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. So these words we actually call the comfortable words, struck home in a very welcome way, as Jesus says, "Come unto me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble of heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Finally, some words from the gospel that sound like good news after the passages we've had about Jesus coming to bring division, a sword, and not peace, about fights and about being challenged and being different from the world. And Father Pagano drives this home by talking about many of the reasons that many of ourselves find ourselves feeling tired and in need of rest for our souls. He says clergy are tired because we've had to find new ways to be clergy during the pandemic, to lead worship and to maintain a sense of fellowship and pastoral care for the people we serve. The reality is, for example, that none of the three of the clergy gathered here today ever wanted to be tele-evangelists in any sense of the word. All three of us would tell you we hate preaching into a camera. And none of us are tech savvy. And it takes a lot of energy to figure out what to do, even with the help of people like Nathaniel Powell and Aaron Zhu, who do know how to do this work. And not only are we tired because we've been challenged to figure out new ways to be church, we are tired as a people and a nation because the pandemic has caused us to face uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our society. The inequity of health care, the racial tensions, the cultural divides and conflicts that seem to be so much a part of our existence that we cannot escape them ever. And we are tired of struggling with the question of how do our faith and our political and social lives intersect and inform one another? How do we speak the truth we feel God is calling us to name without further dividing and antagonizing our communities and many we love and care for? And since I'm reminded of Madeline Kahn's character in Blazing Saddles, when she sings, "I'm tired. I'm tired of playing the game. And more than anything else, I just want things to get back to normal. Let us sing and worship in our churches safely. Let us not have to confront the realities of systemic racism. Let us not be a dividing country. Let us just get along and find some rest. If we ever needed to hear Jesus say that he will give us rest, now is the time." But I'm also reminded of a lot of very wise biblical scholars who say something to the effect of be careful what you ask for. Because at least when you're talking about with Jesus, there's often it comes with a hidden another agenda, with something we did not expect, a hook, if you will. Remember, Jesus says that he will give us rest. Actually, he says he will give rest to those who take his yoke upon him and learn from him. How comfortable are we with taking that yoke upon ourselves? Remember, a yoke ties one to another person or animal, in case of an ox, and it constrains both of them to work together at the direction of the master. So taking on the yoke of Jesus ties us to one another and means we have to be guided by Jesus if we want to find the rest he is offering. It means following his example of continuing to act, to give, to tell truth to power, to be different and even divisive realities in our world. We take this seriously in light of the passages we have been hearing and in light of the challenges we are facing in our world. It may not seem that easy or restful. Maybe it doesn't even sound like good news. Couldn't Jesus just be there and love us and not challenge us for a little while? Now back to the two stories. The two stories kind of struck home to me because in a sense they are different ways of expressing the temptation I feel when I'm experiencing this sense of tiredness. And the temptation is either to go through the notions of normalcy, while in a sense, I, if you will, tie Jesus to the bedpost, like the cat in the story I began with. I say my prayers, go about my duties, do good things that are needed to be done, but I don't let Jesus mess too directly in my life. Keep him at arm's length. Don't risk really being changed by the one who calls me to a new place. Or Bishop Curry's story talks about another aspect of this temptation. Is I want to go find a safe cage of normalcy in which I can hide until the storm is over. Or I want to get back to normal as soon as possible and pretend that everything is safe and nothing has changed. The temptation is related in that I want to escape to a perceived place of safety, to find a place where I won't be stretched or challenged, a place where Jesus is a safe friend who comforts and protects me from the troubles I encounter and the stresses of this particular time and place. And then I'm reminded of a conversation in C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. Lucy is still trying to figure out who this lion figure, Aslan, really is. And she asks a question. Is he safe? To which one of the very knowledgeable animals responded, heavens, no, he's not safe, but he is good. The challenge is to remember that God never called us to lives of safety in Jesus. Never promised to protect us from the dangers and challenges of our world. Never promised that we would not be challenged to speak and act in ways that might even set us at odds with our world. Because that is following the yoke of Jesus. But God did promise that he will be with us in these moments. That he will work in and through our challenges, and that he will offer rest and refreshment in these times of trial and challenge to those who live in him, who take his yoke and follow his call. So today we face the reality that we're all tired and in a sense would love to find a way to retreat to a safe place, to have Jesus offer us rest and renewal, and to feel safe and calm. But retreating from the world is not the way of the gospel. We are called to continue to be faithful, to say our prayers, to spend time quietly listening and waiting upon God and upon Jesus, to invite God to climb, if you will, into our laps, into the very fabric of our lives, in new ways. We're called to listen to how God challenges us to be agents of change in our world, to continue to be agents of love in the face of hatred, reconciliation in the face of division, hope in the places of despair, to be changed by the world in which we live, not changed in our essence, but by being open to the new ways God is calling us to be God's people. New ways to worship, new ways to serve, new ways to speak truth into our world. And to trust that this is the way to refreshment. The way of knowing that Jesus is with us even in the midst of the storm. And to know that peace that passes all understanding, that will renew our very souls. So brothers and sisters, stay strong in the faith. Resist the temptation to tie Jesus to the bedpost or retreat to cages of safety. Trust that God is working a new thing in our midst, and live in the peace that comes from being present with Jesus in this time and place.